Cool. So, hi everyone. My name is Anton. Has Sam told you anything about today? Any context at all? I guess Julian, you've got a little bit of a clue.
An inkling.
Cool. So today isn't going to be too presenty. I'll share a few words. I have a little guided meditation that I wrote maybe a few months ago that I think is a good entry into a very open, heartfelt discussion about what a new story could be. So we speak a lot about what's wrong, political polarization, Trump, Brexit, extinction, what's happening to the climate, oil companies, but often don't give very much time to have a deep discussion about what is actually working and how all of these movements and all of these ideas are actually converging and accelerating very fast. And if we can catalyze and enable more of that, then actually we're a lot closer than we think to finding a much better path and resolving some of these tensions and conflicts and crises that exist. So that's the essence of today, co-creating a new story. And I'll wait for Sam to come back. And in the meantime, if we could go around and just share who we are, what brought us here today, and your experience of interdependence so far. So feel free to pop
Barney
up.
Green, I'm a local primary school music teacher.
Barney,
Yeah, Barney. I've been to the workshop yesterday morning at Passing Clouds. A really fascinating one the Wednesday before at WeWork with the frighteningly inspiring James Cameron, which was really fascinating. That one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a hard hitter, right?
Yeah.
The filmmaker, yeah?
No. But to be honest, there's definite parity with the filmmaker because I don't know if many people know, but the man that made the film Titanic is also doing incredible work in terms of climate change and stuff.
Yeah.
He does, just one meal and all that.
And marine conservation as well,
Yeah,
in a big way.
Huge, exactly. So this guy's sort of batting at a similar weight.
Yeah.
So it's very good. My interest is, my skills and experience are minimal in this area. I've worked in the voluntary sector for 30, 40 years, but working for Crisis, a homeless charity, and with ex-offenders and things like that, and young people mainly in employment. So, but I'm aware of this pressing issue, and working with 460 very wonderful and creative young minds makes the pressing emergency of it only greater. So, yeah, I've got an interest, and it seemed like a good thing, and it is.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Hi, Barney.
I'm Julian. I'm helping organise some of these interdependence events. But most of the rest of my time is spent making music. Which I don't necessarily do because I'm particularly good at it, but because there often doesn't feel like much else to do. Either. But now there definitely feels like something more urgent and pressing.
Please grab a chair as well, and, or the sofa, even better. We're just doing a quick round of introduction, sharing who we are, what brought us here, and the experience of interdependence so far. So Barney, Julian.
My name is Giedre. I have a background in sustainable development. I work in energy policy. I wish there was more focus on climate change. I'm very concerned about it, and I'm very happy to get involved to see what's happening.
Apologies for the washing machine. Hopefully it doesn't affect the sound too
I
much.
think it's introducing itself, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, exactly.
It's at that point in the circle.
Hi, I'm Bianca. I'm Italian, and I'm really passionate about sustainability and entrepreneurship. And when I heard about the program interdependence, I thought it was a great project and a great way to get inspired and meet engaged people, and that's why I'm here. And so far I had a great time, only 1 week, so looking forward next week.
Hello everyone, I'm Sam. I think it's always really interesting when you work on something for a long time with a small group of people, and then you sort of put it out there and see what happens and what kind of people you attract. So I'm pretty exhausted from doing all these workshops, but it's been also energizing and inspiring. So looking forward to this one as well.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I don't know anything about interdependence, I'm sorry. I'm here because Lazar thought it would be a good session for me to attend. I've been heavily involved with Extinction Rebellion since the rebellion, obviously very concerned about climate change. I'm also kind of championing sustainability and a B Corp certification with the company that I
Great.
work with at the moment, so interdependence seems very relevant from a B Corp perspective as well.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Luca, Italian. I'm doing a master degree at UCL in risk disaster and resilience, and I'm focused on mega firestorms, and I'm involved with a group of firefighters in Italy. And in interviewing them, they realized, and I realized, that the key point was not much to extinguish the fire, but prevent them. And that opened many questions, and I think these could provide some of the answer.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I'm Zaza. I've also been involved with the Extinction Rebellion, helping with the rescue support. And lately I've got really interested with what I'm learning with deep adaptation. And I got to meet these guys when they ran their workshop on Monday, and really think it's important to have these conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you mind if I pause the washing machine?
I don't know how to, but yeah, I would love to. Let's give that a go. It's a washing machine that goes on for hours, which, yeah. Maybe just, is there a way of turning it off?
There's a button that says start.
Oh, pause. Oh, perfect. That's a good, yeah, that's a good plan. I was about to apologize for the washing machine, but this is even better. Cool. So a little bit about me and this place. So I studied architecture at UCL, but then went down a very different route, basically as a freelance designer, building websites, and then I got involved in several social enterprises and helped a lot of companies raise quite a bit of money for various social action projects, and we kind of did deals with Channel 4, with The Shard, with BT, with BBC as well. And so yeah, lots of really cool projects. That then led me into setting up my own company, Exponentials, which I really just kind of called it a startup consultancy, and it just let me travel and just help my friends on all of their startups and stay very free and flexible. That led me to helping a student finance business really go to the next level and get their Series A. I also helped start a company called Give Vision, which is building tech for the blind, so kind of wearable headsets to help with visual impairment. And did a lot of consulting with business schools actually around online education and kind of new ways of building alumni networks and kind of creating lifelong learning. So that was good fun. And it was only really until through going to the Burning Man Festival that I then reconnected with my architectural roots and started to really think about, yes, the question of how we live in our cities, coming back to sustainability, but also coming back to just architecture and real estate. And after Burning Man, I met a Swedish investor that then led me to Sweden to open this co-living house called Tech Farm. And that's where I met Morgan. And also what started me on my journey towards really thinking about cities. So I did some big consulting projects with large housing developers. And what brought me back to London is an opportunity to be a partner in a new firm. And we've got some big pension fund backing, and we're looking to do large-scale affordable housing across the city in the right way, really taking a long-term view, a regenerative view. And it's a great opportunity to kind of bring together all of these different threads of my life and my career, from the retreats I've gone on and the festivals all the way through to the consulting and the digital side. So that's a bit about me. And in my time, I've been to quite a few kind of leadership retreats or gatherings and workshops, and I always feel that it's much better if everyone does the talking rather than just me. And so I wrote this guided meditation, which is, I think, a wonderful way to then flow into an open conversation where we'll take the speaking shell, pass it around, and then just kind of speak from the heart about what a new story could look like. Because in the kind of words of Charles Eisenstein, we really do need to kind of describe and envision the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And part of those types of conversations help to build a picture of actually what is already happening and what can be accelerated, rather than feeling that actually there's this just black hole of chaos. Actually feeling that, wait, there's a lot of things that are just building momentum and just waiting for that tipping point. So yeah, and then this place is our home. We call it Exora House. It's kind of a word we imagined together with Morgan. And these are paintings that I've done over the years and recently. And yeah, we like to host all sorts of gatherings, Jeffersonian dinners, music, painting jams here. And yeah, so lovely to have you. And we've had several chats with Sam, and I'm a big supporter of what he's trying to do. I think at the core, the kind of, I guess, the real systemic core of what needs to change is a shift from separation, or the illusion of separation, towards really seeing everything as interconnected and drawing from the lessons of nature in how we build our world. So yeah, so without further ado, I'll turn up the wonderful, tranquil music, and then I'll read out this meditation. So I invite you to just find a comfortable space, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and then I'll just get it out. Okay. Take a deep breath and give full attention to your heart and to your body. I would like to take you back to the moment of the Big Bang. In a billionth of a second, and 14.7 billion years ago, all the universe became exploding energy. Energy attracted energy and formed atoms, spinning through space and time, working at the speed of light over millennia, creating billions of galaxies. One of those galaxies was our Milky Way, and halfway along one of its spiral arms, the sun was born, and around the sun, planets coalesced. One of those planets, where it was not too hot and not too cold, became our home, planet Earth. To help our human minds grasp the cosmic times we're dealing with, and since the beginning of planet Earth, that is to say 4.6 billion years ago, let us imagine Earth as a woman of 46 years. Let's call her Gaia. We will now use her life, which is cosmically ours as well, to trace the story of this small blue dot that we call our home. Fairly early in Gaia's life, deep in her oceanic volcano vents, the first molecules of life were formed. In these molecules grouped together to form the first cell. In time, these molecules grouped together to form the first cell, with strands of DNA. Every single plant and animal can trace its ancestry back to that first cell, which means that ultimately we are all related. Gaia waited till she was 42 years old, just 4 years ago, before creating life on land. Plants began to move onto land and transform rock dust into soil. Insects followed soon after. 2 years later came the dinosaurs. It was only 3 months ago in Gaia's life that we became great apes, and just 2 days ago, our species, our ancestors, Homo sapiens, arrived. For 99% of our time on planet Earth, we were living in tribes of up to 250 people, wandering around as the seasons change, constantly sensing into the rhythm and cycles of nature. We used fire, made music and art. Eventually we developed the power of language and speech to form bonds, tell stories, and pass on what we have learned to the next generation. It was only 1 hour ago that we started to farm the land and introduced the concept of ownership. We began to move into cities and started to separate ourselves from nature, seeing it as something outside of us. In the last 60 seconds, we have gone through the Industrial Revolution. During this time, the human population grew from 1 billion to over 7 billion, and the trend suggests that we will continue to grow to a peak population of almost 11 billion. The digital revolution just started this second. Human life on Earth has been unstoppable, but the planet that sustains us can no longer keep up. Scientists are telling us that changes in the Earth's climate are escalating faster than even the most pessimistic estimate. Our societies are becoming increasingly polarized and divided. We are told again and again that time is running out. In most of us, there's this deep inner knowing that we cannot carry on this way. And yet, we are still very much trapped in our old habits and systems. Why is it so goddamn hard to change? Let's take a moment to reflect on Gaia's 46 years of life. Let's imagine that she's sitting directly in front of you. She looks deep into your eyes and asks, if you know all of this, why don't you stop? If you know all of this, why don't you stop? If you know all of this, why don't you stop? If you know all of this, why don't you stop? There is no hiding from the truth. Over the past decades, we have not heard Gaia's call. We have not acknowledged her tears. We have ignored her warnings. We have wasted her gifts, and now we face a serious risk of runaway climate change and human suffering at a scale never before experienced in human history. This is the story of our time. This is the world we made. However, anything that can be made by man can also be unmade by man. Within the cracks of the old world shines a light that can lead us towards a new path, that can help us tell a new story. This is a path and a story that we will be exploring today. A path that flows inside out. A path into the unknown that we must take both individually and collectively. So as we end this meditation, I will then share a few words about how I imagine this more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And then we can go around. So I invite you just to take a few moments to open your eyes and just sit with that meditation. So there's a few people that I've run into that I think are kind of really left an impression on me around this kind of deeper conversation. Is the door still shaking? No. Around this deeper conversation about the roots of our climate crisis and the intellectual but also the more spiritual and emotional shift that's required to move into a more solution, positive mindset. And I'm a big fan of Giles Hutchins and his work, Illusion of Separation and Nature of Business. And also Tim McCarthy from Embercombe and how he writes about the children's fire. I love the Shambhala prophecy video as well, Joanna Macy. And more recently I was at in Findhorn for their Climate Change and Consciousness Summit. And I met this really, really awesome guy that was one of the tribal elders from Greenland. And he had these 2 cylinders that he brought along. And then he would introduce himself and kind of speak about the ice, because he is from Greenland and he is the tribal leader of the ice people. And so he goes around the world and talks about ice wisdom and how basically the ice is melting significantly faster than anyone imagined, and that this is changing, and that we need to be aware of it, and we need to not just hear it, we need to act on it. And as he was giving this, telling the story, he then got out these 2 big cylinders and he started yelling. And I mean not just like a little bit of a song, like for a good 5 to 10 minutes, "Wah!" like even louder than that. And so, and then by that time, everyone, like, he went round again and again and again. The people in the front row were like blasted, and if you were further back, then you were maybe had a little bit less of the blast, but still, it was intense. And then he repeated it again. Very, very simple message, in a very playful way as well, with great humor. And he had a big long beard, kind of like, yeah. And I then went and sat with him a couple of days later and just asked, like, so what is it with these 2 circles, right? Like, is that some tribal thing, or did you kind of like, why did you do that? Because it had a really powerful effect. And then he said, well, no, I made it up. I made it up because I was going around and giving talks, and no one was listening. Well, everyone was listening. Everyone was applauding, but no one was hearing or acting or doing anything about it. And so you need to have a clear message, but then you also need to shake people up a little bit, and then get them to really feel that and remember that feeling, that intensity, to then lead them towards some form of action. And that closes the loop and builds new habits. And so I think that with that in mind, one of the things that I wrote on the plane, going on the way back, was I was really inspired by all of the different indigenous tribes and elders that come and kind of shared at Embercombe, at Findhorn. But all of them were still talking about this in the abstract. They hadn't found a way to translate the importance of listening to nature and nature's wisdom, caring for each other and the planet, and reminding ourselves to think not just with our heads but our hearts, to translate that into something that could be a picture of what a future could be. So they didn't know how. They didn't have a picture of what that would be. But they knew that the intention was to remind us that actually there is huge wisdom in the earth, there's huge wisdom in nature, there's huge wisdom in our emotions. But somehow there was this kind of void of what do we do, other than give space and dance and play and sit in meditation. And that got me writing. And so I wrote of these 9, and I kind of later made them 10, converging movements that I think paint a picture or kind of point us in a direction of where things could be. And I think Sam is already on top of many of these, if not all of them, with interdependence. And I think the mindset that is really important is to look at it at a systems level. All in isolation, each of these movements seem futile. But when you look at them all together, working together and enabling each other, then you can really see something much bigger manifest in the future. So the first one that I wrote down is really very much rooted in what Findhorn and is all about. You know, these consciousness, raising the consciousness of society, and our leaders And so this is rooted in a variety of different elements. The rise of mindfulness, the rise of yoga. You have a lot of leadership retreats going back to nature. And also a lot of the, I guess, plant-based medicines, and how a lot of indigenous leaders are beginning to really put those out into more mainstream Western society. You have the arts that help us to reconnect with our bodies, with our hearts. This whole shift in consciousness is, in many ways, gaining a huge momentum, because we realize that we can't think our way out of our crisis. We have to be able to go deeper and tap into an intuition, into a way of working together, into a way of relating that is fundamentally different from how we do it today. And before we can really kind of change things systemically out there, we first need to go inside and recognize that we need to not just hear the message, we need to feel it. And that's part of what this whole movement is about. These festivals, these gatherings, these retreats, these circles, so many people are training in the art of great facilitation, holding space, enabling people to really listen, to go out into nature and listen to all of the sounds of all the trees and the birds and the water, and to then translate that listening and that awareness to yourself, and then also to others and to the planet. So this is, I think, a really powerful movement that is building a lot of momentum. Everything from the amount of people that have yoga pants and yoga mats today, to the fact that mindfulness is now a practice in most top companies, as well as in the UN and even in the Houses of Parliament. Right? People are recognizing that this is important, because we need to create stillness in order to allow a new knowledge, a new insight, a new language to emerge. So this is, I think, a very important anchoring movement. But then I think, out of that also, and it's interesting that a lot of XR organizers have actually gone on a lot of very interesting spiritual journeys themselves, and spend a lot of time in nature and a lot of time in these kind of leadership communities. And so the next wave, I think, the next movement, is the wave of activism. It's the fact of kind of community engagement and mobilization, people getting to the streets, people organizing. It's very much like volunteer-led networks. I'd say interdependence really fits into that movement in a way, where what you're trying to do is just raise awareness in the media. You're trying to get people to come together and really form a kind of nonviolent protest, which in a way creates a solidarity, both physically and digitally, between a lot of people that might be thinking along the same lines, but haven't really been given a voice, or feel like they're in such a minority that there's no point. So I think that's a very, very important part of the puzzle, because as XR have done, it gets into the media. It gets into the media, it gets into the mainstream, and it's impossible to ignore. And kind of what Greta Thunberg has done, and a lot of the school marches are a very important piece of the puzzle, especially in influencing policy and shaping the agenda of the media as well. The third movement, which often is very agnostic, is the kind of whole digital tech revolution. The fact we all carry smartphones, big data, sharing economy, and the potential of all of that. It's very interesting that this movement has tried to stay so politically agnostic. And I think that this is going to become more and more challenging as things get more intense in our world, environmentally, socially, politically. And you're seeing that with Zuckerberg and Facebook, right? It's easy for them to stay neutral, but for how long, right? And I think that there is a huge potential of this movement, not necessarily to lead, but to enable and accelerate all of the other movements. And the power of data and smartphones and technology is, we all know. The fourth, I think, is one that is not spoken about as much, but is a pretty goddamn amazing, which is energy, and what is happening with kind of solar, wind, renewables, how a lot of large kind of pension funds are actually divesting from oil and gas. And we are kind of seeing the kind of dying down of traditional energy companies that are very much about fossil fuel extraction and the emergence of renewables and new forms of energy production. And I think that's around the world, the kind of public perception has changed. Of course, there'll be some resistance, but I think there's a lot of optimism there to be had around, the fact that it's very feasible that by 2050 the whole world is using renewables as pretty much the main kind of, or if not total, energy source. And things are moving in that direction. That also ties into mobility, which also is very fascinating around self-driving cars, the electrification of transport, not just in terms of consumer vehicles, and the fact that we're all using Voys and scooters in the cities, and I think that's going to become more of a trend. But also in terms of the big trucks, and even potentially drones, in moving all of our goods in a much more efficient, sustainable way and so forth. And the potential that that brings of self-driving, electrification of transport, bullet trains, you've got the, what's it called, the thing that, Hyperloop, the Hyperloop technology and the possibilities of enabling a whole new form of mobility through this trend. Then you have agriculture, which I think is the one that is furthest behind and the one that is so tied to the water scarcity issue, the failure of our soils around the world. We don't see it because in the West, actually, if anything, our soils are going to get better with climate change, at least in the short term. But in places like India and so forth, the push for agroforestry and the ability to kind of build forests and farms together to really work and develop ecosystem services, to understand how to work with nature rather than against it, to learn the lessons of the Green Revolution and this kind of very industrial farming approach that has had a lot of destruction on a huge amount of natural ecosystems. I think around that there's also understanding the role of conservation, and I forgot to mention that that's a big part of activism movement, is there are certain things that you can't just rebuild, right? You can't regrow the Amazon with technology, right? You can't, soils that have been built over centuries are wiped out. You can't just tech it back together again with a little bit of investment. So there's very, very important for activism and organizations like Greenpeace to preserve and protect very, very critical ecosystems that might be at risk, which is why what's happening in Brazil is very, very worrying, because you don't replace that. And that's the role that activism can play, is that requires people to either pay those countries not to develop that land, or to put that land into a global trust, and then they get paid for that. Or some sort of legal and economic mechanism to prevent doing something so stupid as to burning rich, dense, ancient forests in order to plant soybean to do cattle. And generally, part of that whole agricultural wave is a shift away from meat consumption, is a shift towards more vegetarian diets, more local food. And this is already in the mainstream of kind of celebrity culture, right? The kind of that way of eating, that kind of. The problem is that's now associated as being something that rich people do rather than something that is accessible and affordable for everyone. And also, I think agriculture needs to be seen as one of the great job creators of the future, especially as a lot of traditional kind of, let's say, kind of white-collar work is going to be automated. And with robots and with digitization, there's going to be a lot of office work and a lot of factory work that is just not going to exist. But there is huge value that will come from farming and regenerating landscapes and finding a symbiosis between rural and urban. And this is something where transition towns have done good work, the permaculture movement, all of these things have a lot of knowledge. I also started an indoor farming company, which is another form of technology, often not appreciated that much by the permaculture folk, because it is lots of tech, but basically it's growing greens underground using LED lights, HVAC ventilation systems, and a very, very kind of clean, controlled environment. So what it means is that you can grow super fast on multiple levels in the heart of the city, a very, very high quantity of kind of very, very nutrient-rich greens and leaves. So from spinach, pak choi, kale, different forms of herbs, all of these are very high perishable goods. Often there's a huge amount of waste. They're put into big plastic bags that are hermetically sealed. They lose the taste, they lose the flavor. And this particular niche of food production actually works well in the city because you lose a lot of the nutrition in the transport and in the kind of distribution process. Whereas if your farm is around the corner, you can literally taste it off the harvest, and within a day it's eaten, if not less. And I think that's the advantage of that technology, but that's maybe a little bit niche just because that's what I worked on in Sweden for a while. And it's still going, and I hope to bring that in. And then this leads to the seventh movement and trend. I don't know how many of you have watched Story of Stuff or read the book, but that's a great one to anchor. But the fact that there's absolutely no reason for us not to be designing completely circular cradle-to-cradle products, period, right? The only mechanism, the reason why companies don't do that is because it's not profitable for them to do that, but it's within their means. So how do you celebrate companies like Patagonia that build to last, that make products to last, and also that you design for disassembly, you design for reuse, you make products that last, and you really think about that whole supply chain. And I think already a lot of good work is being done on that. I think the challenge is that it's a little bit fragmented, but this is a whole area that is ripe for disruption, and local manufacturing, 3D printing, all of these movements fit into that. You know, how we make our stuff, how we reuse our stuff is a huge trend, and it's going to become much more local. The idea of shipping our plastic off to the other side of the world is not going to work, and it's not going to happen anymore. And then finally there's there's two more after that, but the eighth trend is my favorite trend. It's what I'm dedicating my career and my life to. It's the trend of smart cities and urbanization that I think encompass in many ways all of the trends that have come before. I think there's a huge opportunity that real estate industry as a whole can play in being a kind of a leader rather than a follower, and in providing a market for all of these new systems and all of these new movements to manifest in the places that we live. Because there will be some sort of counterculture movement back into the countryside rooted in new forms of agriculture and green job creation, but the reality is the only way to sustain so many people on the planet is to build very, very, very good cities that are regenerative, that are clean, that work, that are actually improving our quality of life, that are enabling a lot of the things that we need to happen on a geopolitical level. And so real estate, housing, and infrastructure development is critical. And we need a very fundamentally different design approach to how that works. And that's something that I'm working on and learning a lot about. Because you need to get pension funds and big pots of money to invest in long-term regeneration of neighborhoods and provide high-quality rental housing, shift away from this home ownership model, which only advantages the banks and the lawyers, because every time a house is sold, the banks do very well with the mortgages, and the lawyers do very well with the contracts. But actually, if you're just buying a house in order to have an asset, and then you're selling it again and moving to somewhere else, what we need is a much better quality of rental homes, and a whole wide mix of affordable homes as well. And so that is a whole movement and direction of travel, because if you have a large enough neighborhood that you're building from the ground up or regenerating, suddenly you have your market for your circular economy stuff, for your car sharing, for your green energy, for your completely zero waste society, for your new food products, for all of these things to come together. And you also create the gathering places, the meeting places around which people can reconnect with a different set of values, a different perception of what is important. And that leads to the next trend, which is around purpose, capital, decentralization. I think what's really interesting is, capitalism is always seen as the enemy of these types of conversations, right? That's the problem. But actually, capitalism is just a tool in a way. It's just something, it's a system that we invented. And I think that capitalism can actually lead us to the direction we want to go if we shift our perception of what we value in our society. So if we value our forests, if we value our relationships, if we value our society, then inherently capitalism is going to then mobilize to protect those things and to value them and to invest in them. So somehow, and I could articulate this better, somehow we need to encourage a lot more capital from family offices and from pension funds to move not just into Goldman Sachs kind of bonds or whatever it might be, but into new types of funds that have purpose wired in, from the B Corp kind of model to there's this thing in Germany called the Purpose Capital Initiative, and a lot of people, the whole impact investing world. But how do you start to really put these pots of money into good use? And I think this is where Sam takes a kind of a lead in a lot of his work. And how does that get enabled? Because, yeah, the money is there. The money is there. But can you have enough viable prototypes and companies and organizations and models that could take that capital and actually not become part of the problem again? And this is where decentralization is also important, is this notion of a different way of organizing that is very emergent, that where you create a framework around which people can then self-organize and co-create, where leadership isn't top-down, but it's bottom-up, and all of those things. And a lot of people are working on that front as well. And if the kind of like organizational theorists can get together with the capital guys and really understand the role that money and governance can play in accelerating all these movements. Which then leads me to the final thread, which is always this notion of the battle for ideas, the battle of stories, and the role that we have in re-educating the world. And this shift away from nationalism, this idea that when things are bad, we have to protect our own, to global citizenship, to when things are bad, we have to work together. And we have to actually recognize that this is not something we can solve just by locking our door and, putting up our walls and then hiding until it goes away. Like, it's not something that's going to go away, and that is a very interesting challenge of how you get people to shift away from this very primal behavior of there's chaos, I need to protect, I need to hide, to wait. In challenging times, it's really, really important to open up, to actually be even more humble, to reach out even more, to listen more rather than just closing in. And that's something that has to be cultivated in education, in all stages of life, not just the executive level. And around that is what we're doing here today, which is the fact that everyone can participate in telling a new story and making that new story personal to them. And I think that storytelling is a very powerful tool for re-educating and also enabling that shift of perception. So yeah, and I think that what I've found really fascinating in kind of my 20s is that I kind of dabbled in lots of different areas. And I tried a little bit of the food stuff, I tried the kind of leadership stuff, festivals and so forth, and governance. And I found it actually really, really rewarding to just write that out, just to kind of clear my mind and kind of organize it all. And to imagine it all as a spiral, and kind of lots of spirals. And the more, even if you say, I want to focus on cities, or I want to focus on food, or I want to focus on the capital side, or the activism side, the ability to then step out of that and then also just take energy and enthusiasm and meaning and momentum from all those other things is actually really powerful. And seeing it as a whole. And then you kind of actually go, wow, there are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people that are dedicating their lives and their careers and doing great work in all of these areas. And just in the process of campaigning and crowdfunding, the more you can be specific about what those examples could be, and then find what are the touch points that really resonate with that particular high net worth or that particular group or community. Because I think that we're all hearing this, we're all seeing this, we're all feeling this, whether consciously or unconsciously. But we don't trust something that is just in the abstract. We need to also hear something that is specific, that is concrete, and that it is local to us. And if you can find a way to campaign and with the emotion, with the meta story, but also bring it down to something practical like green jobs in agriculture, like zero waste products, like affordable housing that enables all of these other things to work, then I think you have a very compelling movement to build. Because underpinning all of this is this kind of systems-led, interdependent approach. So that's what I wanted to really share. And hopefully that kind of gives you guys a little bit to bounce off. So what we do is we put the shell in the middle, and then if you're called to speak, then you just grab the shell and feel free. There's no time limit this time, right? Like, just if you want to speak and you have something to say, just go for it. It's a very much about just listening with the heart, speaking with the heart, and trying not to also think about what you're going to say. Right? When the shell gets placed, you can then kind of think about it, or just even pick up the shell and just give yourself some time, so that you can just be completely in the moment. So thank you for listening, and over to you.
Anything in particular that we're sharing in relation to?
So I think in particular, what movement really resonates with you, and how would you see this story? What language would you use to describe it? I think make it personal, and I think that would be the way. And even if it's just a feedback on what you heard and what you felt as well, would be more than fine.
What I'm finding comforting in a way is seeing that I'm writing stuff down that I don't know anything about, and it's good to know that there's lots of stuff out there. I think it would be it would cause me anxiety if I was aware of everything going on and that world was that small. So it's somewhat ironically reassuring to find out that there's things you're referencing and citing as places to go to do reading, or things to watch, or movements happening that are new to me. And that's exciting and optimistic and interesting to have those things to explore. So thank you for that, and thank you for your talk.
So I want to thank you as well, because like Barney, it's good to be able to feel optimistic. By and large, I don't feel very optimistic. I feel quite terrified a lot of the time, and have done for the last sort of 6 months or so. So I feel like it is really good to know, and I think the circles, I think it's important to be aware of that, and I think for me the frustration is that I'm finding in my circle of friends that there isn't this sense of kind of almost panic. I want them to wake up, and I want them to understand that we are facing a climate emergency, and I fear that they might be aware of some of these things that are happening, and they will then use these as a, well, oh, but I know that, you know, green energy is now kind of percolating through, and so in a way I kind of would almost like to have an argument, a way to articulate that this isn't enough, that we need to do more, we need to connect all of these circles, and we need to act a lot more quickly. Now, I don't know if that's because I'm involved with XR and there is this sense of, you know, tell the truth, act now, People's Assembly, and we are very involved with the whole kind of arrestee welfare side of things. So perhaps that has slightly clouded my vision, but I guess I don't want I want to feel optimistic, but at the same time I want people to feel a sense of urgency, and I'm not quite sure how to kind of reconcile those two things.
Just connecting to what she said, I always feel kind of optimistic in this context where when people like you, or even I studied sustainability, so always saw solutions and so okay, there is something we can do, and I always felt very engaged. But then somehow, for example, when I went back home, I'm from Sicily in Italy, and I kind of got stuck with reality again, and with the majority of people just not realizing and not caring about what's happening. Some because I don't know, they just don't care, and others maybe because they come from more disadvantaged backgrounds and they just, you know, want to, like, they just have to gain their money every day to take care about their family, etc., and they don't even care about if they buy some plastic stuff or things. So I feel like, yeah, it's hard to find a way to, yeah, I mean, you can raise awareness in newspapers, etc., but it's hard to really get people on board and make them feel like, you know, this is something that touches all of us, and yeah, reconnecting to humans, reconnecting to nature. Just, yeah, I feel this immense gap between our goodwills and our will of engagement, and then another part of society. Just, this is what strikes me the most.
Very much resonated with what you just said. I think almost perhaps maybe that fits into this battle for ideas, whether that be external or internal at the level of just one person. And I don't think it's necessarily specific to being involved in XR. I think it's more specific to looking at the data and the science. Where I think Julian sort of summed it up quite nicely the other day. Sort of decide, you know, on one end you've almost got sort of despair, and on the other end you've got maybe extreme, you know, motivation or inspiration. Where you, I mean, I think it's true. All of these things are coming together, and there's an immense possibility. The challenge is that we're facing an exponential change on the sort of, you know, the planet isn't going to wait for us to get our shit together. So I think that's a really difficult thing to hold, both those truths, and that I think we kind of, I almost wonder though if we are too drawn towards the fear aspect. If we're all thinking, oh, yeah, this is going to be terrible, does that then make it terrible? And so maybe that's sort of the responsibility for optimism is to almost maybe, so at least maybe how I think about it. But yeah, it's a difficult tightrope to walk.
I have something to say on that actually, which is when I was younger, I read a probably surprisingly large number of psychology and marketing books, and I was always kind of, all of them returned to this fact that you always needed to have a push and a pull. You needed something that you needed to push away from and something you needed to pull towards. And I think that it's really, really important that you close the arc, right? You tell the story of this emergency and people are like, yes, no, it's terrible, and then you understand and you chip. But unless you close the arc with then something that lifts them up and actually gives them a sense of optimism, then it's very easy to just detach and to disengage, because it's the same with like these charity campaigns that go people starving in Africa and all those things, is that it's proven time and time again, if you just hit people with negative communications the first time, they might give, but if it's just giving to a hopeless cause, then eventually you're like, well, you just detach and you just emotionally disengage, and then it just becomes part of your new normal, part of the noise. And there is something about reminding people in a very imaginative way, and this is where art has such an important role to play, in music as well, in what is possible. What are you fighting for rather than fighting against? It's what all the political campaigns are always trying to encourage. But the problem is that people in the activism political community are so trained and used to and so kind of ingrained in explaining what is wrong, in complaining against something, that very little time or even kind of attention is given to how to bring to life the opportunity space. And I think that in itself is a form of campaigning. It might be more long term, but it ultimately then leads to a deeper change because it's pulling and pushing at the same time. So yeah, that's partly why this new story aspect, and why when Sam approached me I wanted to host it in this way, because it's I think that's I always think, even like, I will vote for whatever politician, whatever party that comes up and talks about concrete ideas of reimagining the economy in a way that is sensible and that is thoughtful, and that emphasizes the importance of working across parties, regardless. And that so far away from that is just embarrassing. But anyway, that's
Can I just ask a question about, so you were talking about capitalism and how it could still work in this kind of more cohesive, more sustainable society, and you were saying that so these public goods like forests, they could be protected. So could you explain a bit, since they are not profit generating?
Yeah, I explained that part very badly because I was trying to combine two arguments. There is simply conservation movement, which is recognizing the value of the natural world within the context of our lives and future generations, and understanding that and understanding the cost that destroying that would have across the board, I think is very, very important. And it's very important people really understand and feel that, and therefore don't do stupid things, right? Just because a foresting company can get rights doesn't necessarily mean that they should be given the opportunity to then go and extract from that resource. So yeah, that's a whole area that I'm not a specialist in. People that know this have worked in Greenpeace and all of these organizations in conservation. There is a real role, there's a real expertise, there's a real profession in doing this really well and making sure that it's seen as a reconciliatory conversation. And it's difficult because you've also got a country that's dealing with a lot of poverty often, and how do they find a way to create jobs? And they're in a difficult situation. There was I don't know what country it was, whether it was Peru, where they had this kind of offer. If you...
It was Ecuador.
Ecuador, yeah. And that's a really tricky question, and I think, very, very good lawyers and negotiators and campaigners, that's an amazing kind of role that they can play in that aspect. For me, I think that the wider question about kind of regenerative or conscious capitalism comes from a shifting perception of what is valuable. And if what we value is quality of life, then quality of life isn't necessarily linked to material wealth. So the wealth of our relationships, how healthy we feel inside, our ability to really experience with all of our senses the full magic of being alive, right? If all of these things are valued more and recognized more, then we begin to readjust what is important and what we choose to give our time to, right? And what we choose to build. Now, that's of course very theoretical, but I think it begins there, and that's then flows into then businesses like Patagonia and companies where you have very much a long-term versus a short-term strategy. So you don't have a board that's constantly kicking you, telling you need to meet these quarterly returns. I think that's the start. Whether money goes into cryptos or whether things, I think it's difficult to predict really what would happen there. I think the only way that we can move away from money is if there is complete revolution and chaos, like beyond anything we could probably imagine today. Hopefully we can find a way to transition, and that's where there's very, very important that people that have access to very, very big pots of money like pension funds and like family offices that are inherently invested in and have also the freedom and autonomy in some cases to move money in a different direction, right? But I think, Sam, you probably can say a lot more about this than me.
Well, I think what's interesting is there isn't really a big button somewhere that you can just press Control, Delete, and that's it, no more capitalism. So I wouldn't worry too much about it sort of instantly disappearing.
Yeah.
I think it would always be a shift. But who knows what would happen under certain pressures. I mean, I think the most likely issues that are going to arise could be if you have a meltdown in the financial system, perhaps due to crop failure and speculation, and then all of a sudden our credit system locks up and we don't have access to capital. I think it's much more likely that something like that would derail it, destroy it, whatever you want to call it, than all of the vested interests suddenly deciding that they don't want to have that system anymore. So then the question becomes, what's there to take its place, or what kind of resilient systems are there? I mean, to some extent, this idea with the interdependence bond is to find a means through which you can recycle the money that currently exists into something else, and in the process build the infrastructure we need to build. That's kind of a core principle. So I guess we're trying to come up with a clever strategy that doesn't involve destroying the system, but whether or not we can get it to 300 trillion scale in time, time will tell.
But how do you imagine that mechanism working? So like what's from now to if you build a platform just as you envision it, what is that?
So I guess it's individual people donating and receiving one of these bonds, and then it's bringing money in from institutional investors to pretty much on the same terms that they used to get to scale. And as the climate crisis continues to unfold, perhaps people start to think, well, maybe actually having something that having a commodity, if you like, or a token that can get me food and energy, and is building those things, food and energy, at a local level, is more valuable than having money in a bank, where, if the capitalist system goes down, you don't have any money left. In this country, we're guaranteed up to £80,000 in our bank account. If you're lucky enough to have £80,000. But even then, you're still relying on governments doing that. So I guess it's if people decide that actually those kind of things are more useful, then that's one reason that people might shift over to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and I guess the other point to say is that the idea is that it's a way of enabling everyone to own a piece of that infrastructure and benefit from its increasing value over time. So it's kind of a way of almost enabling everyone to own a bit of that community and that better world that we're trying to build.
Yeah, for sure. Do you guys have a sense of, just in the UK, if you were to get a pot of money, what you would do with it in terms of creating that infrastructure? Is there like a plan and a kind of, okay, if it was with $1 million, this would happen, and then how has it got that far in terms of?
So essentially, what we want to do is to empower people, like you were talking about, the self-organising, to say, yes, I would like solar panels on the roofs of my community. I'd like to start producing food locally, and to essentially help facilitate all of the steps that you need to go through to do that. In order to attract money from these institutional pots of money, you really want the scale to be as big as possible. So potentially sort of kind of order of magnitude of around about maybe 10 million, which would be something like 200 homes if within a relatively close area. The scale can kind of vary depending on the economies of scale, but if you imagine, say, 4 blocks in a city, that's kind of what you'd be aiming for. One house doesn't get you the economies of scale. So it's really, it's about bringing money in, but also having the space and the support locally to be able to actually deploy the infrastructure, and matching the amount of money that we're able to get from individual donations to then crowd in, if you like, or get co-investment from institutional money. Because all of them actually are looking to put money into these things.
Exactly.
But there just isn't enough projects.
Yeah.
So it's actually a kind of coordination problem of trying to match the demand with the supply. And that's pretty much what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think food and energy is a great place to start, maybe with a...
And potentially longer term climate resilient housing as well. I mean, the big problem is that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to need places to live when their existing housing is not appropriate for sea level rise, or if you can't, it's too hot.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's probably much longer term.
Yeah, that's true. So there's a really good thing to read called the Urban Village Project by Space 10. It's an IKEA innovation lab. Space 10. It's an IKEA innovation lab, and they have great articles there. It's a lot of models on how that could work. Urban Village Project in Space 10. And regen villages is also interesting to look at. But I think that there is going to be a role in the countryside, but there's also going to be a very critical role in the city for building this infrastructure. And so it's
Actually, right now you see in the main project is the biggest position of the projects by SOAS and School of Architecture.
Ah, cool. Are they all doing kind of climate resilient buildings now?
Most of them are based on urban environment.
Nice.
And there are hundreds and hundreds of posters and ideas.
Is that like an exhibition of
It's
existing?
free. You just walk in and
Where is that, sorry?
at UCL.
Okay.
And I think it's phasing out slowly, but a few days ago there were lots of books and the brochure being given out. But the posters are still there.
And are they very climate focused? Because when I was at the Bartlett, and it was not the case. But that was 10 years ago. So are they? I mean,
No, SOAS, Bartlett.
Bartlett.
Yeah. But this position is at UCL on the main quad.
Yeah. But is it responding to all of these questions?
I think so, because it's all based on, nowadays the focus is on the urban environment to sort out You know, and there's a lots of, like you can see, the projects is a mixture of blending green and new technologies, etc., etc., etc.
Cool.
I was really surprised. I mean, there are hundreds of posters. I don't know how many students took part, and the quality of the poster is excellent. So it must
Yeah.
cost lots of money to put
Yeah,
it
the Bartlett is very good at its presentation. Yeah.
Anyway, there is something I would like to say. Take
Yeah,
a shot.
go for it.
Of the many, many, many things I would like to say, in 1500, more or less, the Netherlands major economy was based on tulips. And there are historical records of tulips, bulbs, being traded for houses. Imagine a bulb of tulips, a bulb being traded for a house. So, if I guess at the time the Dutch were crazy about flowers somehow. Then they become gulping herrings and cheese, and perhaps they forgot about the flowers. So, the point I would like to make is us choosing what to value most. For some reason, we decide on gold and on the shining stones. But before that, we were using many cultures, stones, carved piece of wood, shells, and so on. So what surprised me a lot is why nobody thought of trading in trees, in green patches. The Amazon forest that we know has been under siege for years. Some private entrepreneur bought few bits, but even knowing that the Amazon forest was being depleted at a very fast rate, nobody thought of a major pan-European world investment and stop Brazil selling out blocks to private companies to exploit it. It's happening in Africa again and in Russia too, right now. So, what is? I don't understand why it's so difficult to change the value. Now we don't use, and gold is not used anymore in the banking system as a based on measurement of the value of our money. It's all digital, I guess. So why not using trees or green? Because sooner or later, for example, the carbon trade will be a good example. Instead of buying shares of how much you can pollute or whatever, you could buy investments. Some companies say, okay, I'm building this now, and I know because I'm building this by law, I should put 100 trees down, and somebody will put 100 trees. This is to compensate. So giving to trees values. And that we will, over the sudden everybody will open our eyes and we will see value where value actually is. But it is a very drastic way of seeing it, because you should value the tree in terms of monetary value. You should value the tree for what it is, which is clean air and pure water. And I was mentioning this example a few days ago to some of my colleagues. I don't know if you will hear also. Coca-Cola already look into it and start already buy large patches of land where lakes are, and they're cleaning out the place, fencing it, because they realize it's most costly to them to build a plant which produces pure water than be a bit conservative and safeguard an area which pure water is already there.
That's great. That's great.
So but the thing is that as always, they're not doing it for altruistic reasons. The bottom line, Luca, as you know, and I know your question is rhetorical ultimately. It's down to profit and it's down to immediate gratification. We struggle as a species with the very noble and sensible principle of delayed gratification. This country was forested everywhere.
Yeah.
Even Dalston. It's a long time ago, as a small boy. But but people don't think ahead like that. And the analogy I would argue with, and it's beautiful, but it's not maybe quite right with the tulips in the Netherlands. Is that tulips are beautiful, any flowers are beautiful, has an aesthetic beauty. And maybe there was some element to that, I would suggest, but I think it was probably being used as a currency for more significantly than for its inherent beauty and loveliness, than the fact that it was a convenient commodity that was attainable. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you had more for red tulips than you had for different coloured tulips. I'm not a tulip specialist. But, you know, like the gold standard or whatever, you know, or I promise to pay the bearer, written on the pound note. It's only what the value that you place on it. And we don't work like that. And when you're at a party, generally, unless you're me, when the fridge is running out of beer, you wait till the last beer is gone. I don't. I'm in the off license like a soldier buying in advance. But most people don't do that. And it's you know.
You're a stockpiler.
I'm a squirrel.
A squirrel.
That's what it is, Julia. Get my nuts in. No, but you know, rather than just waiting to the last minute, and all of a sudden there's a permafrost and you're buggered.
Before you know, there's an ice age.
Perhaps someone should come up with the idea, exploit that, the greed of the company, and say, okay, from now on, it's not anymore gold or diamond, it's tree. We invest in tree. We trade in tree.
Getting a beach or a fur in my wallet could be a bit tricky. Yeah, absolutely, as a principle. But the thing is that sort of that goes back to what Sam was saying about bonds, you know, and having a value in something. And people do have the capacity. I mean, it is perhaps pertinent to say that further down this block, and you may not know this, Anton, you may, but there was the startings of an organisation that has now grown large called Timber Wharf Time Bank.
Okay.
And Timber Wharf Time Bank started here in this building at the canal end, and Timber Wharf Time Bank was a time banking organisation where basically if I was to give you a drum kit lesson, you would give me an hour back of scaring the bejesus out of me about the risk of about climate change or whatever. You could change any skill. Anton could give me a painting of his, and I'd cook him probably quite a few meals. You know, and that's they've now the name of the organisation has now changed, and it eludes me for the moment, but it's doing very well, and it's you know it's.
So it's a skill exchange.
It's a skill exchange.
Financial
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, but you know, people pay me for piano lessons, so it's a monetary. It's no different. It's just a different. It's different value. Yeah.
Without using the word money. It's another
Without using the word money.
value.
Money's just a token.
Yeah.
What it is.
You put the value what you want.
The thing is that the money is just a token. I mean, it looks quite nice, I suppose. Apart from the new ones are waterproof. I'd much rather have a tulip, frankly. But
it buys you something that with the money you can then go and spend it on other things. But
Yes.
with trees, so you trade in trees, or you exchange for trees. Then what can you do with your trees?
well, the tree is simply a token. That's all it is. But you know what? In the same way that now, if you have, I think over something mad like over £1 million, you can set up your own. Or is it 2 million? You can set up your own bank, which means then you're actually legally allowed to inject, to print money and put it into the economy. So I got that from Sam actually. I have been
10
watching
million,
this.
I think it is.
Was it 10 million? Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
You know, so you can create these tokens. So you know, wouldn't that
Why
be
not,
great?
why not create your own?
We'll create your own token. Wouldn't it be great if those tokens were trees?
A good organisation to look to. Actually, Germany and Berlin has like fantastic projects all around. Venn is a really great one to look at. VENN.
VENN.
And they do a lot of stuff around time banking and co-living and neighbourhood scale initiatives. Yeah, and then they're based out of Israel as well.
Okay.
So I think that there's a lot of things in Israel as well that are very good to look at. And then, I mean, there's Ecotasia, I think it's called Ecosia. Anyway, it's Ecosia, that are planting trees and creating a search engine. So the idea is that, they're competing against Google, with a very, very progressive kind of tree planting strategy. And so the sense of like, if you are going to search with us, and then we're going to be planting trees. Yeah. So I mean,
Can you repeat the Berlin-based one?
Venn, V-E-N-N.
V-E-N-F.
N-N, two N's, Venn. Like Venn diagram.
Ah, the Venn diagram. Yeah.
Yes, so it's Venn, yeah. So yeah, so I mean, I think that what often happens is then people gather, ideally locally, and then they start talking about all of these issues or trends. But there aren't necessarily blueprints to go to, so then a lot of reinventing wheel happens on a local level. And so there is the power of an interdependence agency is that very quickly local gatherings and groups that want to do something at a local level can very quickly find blueprints that they can draw from so that they can leapfrog. And this kind of idea of leapfrogging in terms of thinking, in terms of actual projects that can be started, initiatives, and then also to encourage that local group to also find not just to do what they think is best, but also to do the things that resonate most with them. Because it has to be personal, otherwise people don't follow through. If it's purely intellectual and analytical, then it's easy to then just detach. But if it's personal to that group, and if they can find the blueprint that is right for them at that time, then you're more likely to get towards action. But it's I think that with the kind of deep dive into a financial instrument like a bond, I think that's a really, really strong thing to anchor people around. And if you guys can really explain that very concretely with Sam's background and with others, I think that's a really, really strong, powerful thing. I think then rooting yourself into the details of what is the cutting edge stuff happening in the UK and around Europe and the world around agriculture, energy, and potentially even housing later on. And just like root it, like it's the financial instrument that then enables the green jobs in energy and agriculture in the UK. And that is a really strong message. In my opinion, it's the message that's most important for politicians to be rallying around right now because it's kind of concrete and it responds to the time. I think diving deep into that, I think you've got a really good grasp of the finance side, kind of really digging deeper into what's happening. Maybe it is through transition towns around kind of innovative farms. You know, there's someone called Abby Rose who is very involved in. She does a podcast around kind of helping farmers innovate through technology and through data. Very simple but meaningful for them. She has a family farm, I think, in Chile, and she also is in the UK. I think it's like Farmerama or Farmerema or something like that. But yes, Soil Association, like contact all of those, like Prince Charles, all of the things he runs around in. Make it inherently British as well, right? Like that's clearly that works as a campaign, right? The more it feels like, you're getting back into the land, or you're linking this financial tool to then this local action across the country. I wish you all good luck and get involved. I think it's great stuff and important, and I think initiatives like Sam's, if in some way it can become a bridge with Extinction Rebellion, but also with the finance world, I think that can be really powerful. So yeah.
Just like to say, it's not my initiative per se, but it's very much something that has been co-created and we hope to bring lots of other people into. Yeah, perfect. It's just my relationship to it has been just through meeting and having chats with Sam. So it's in that self-governance open model, I think blueprints can really come to the surface, and really think about what is that story. And what are all the dimensions you can bring into that story? Because, I think the crisis is important not to forget, but also the mobilization towards something and the push and the pull. If there's one thing to maybe take away from today, it's to give just as much time and energy to the optimistic solution story as to the crisis and doom story.
And yeah, so, and thank you for coming, and over to you, and make sense. And I'll
Maybe we'll have a little break.
oh yeah,
Thank you very
feel
much.
free for some. Just